you.
Appreciate it. All right. Well, thank all of you for coming out tonight on a rainy night that, depending on where you're from, whether this is really bad rain, if you're from Seattle, it's like, rain? Really? What rain? But for Phoenix people, this is like, are we canceling? Are we rained out? So thank you for coming. I know some of you came from quite a ways to be here. I know some of you rushed from work through the traffic. It's like slaying dragons out there every day, especially today with crazy people driving in the rain. And, maybe somebody had to make childcare arrangements. So whatever your situation was, I really appreciate you coming out to be here. So public speaking, wow, you hear that? And some of you are probably like, yee, that's like words that strike fear in your heart for a lot of folks. Do I have some folks like that here? Show of hands. All right. Used to be? All right. So all of us get the jitters from time to time, so maybe that's what brought some of you out. Some of you may feel like, hey, I'm pretty good at this. I kind of wing it, and I don't have too many problems. Maybe I can just pick up some tips here and there about how to be a better speaker. And some of you might just be kind of curious to what this is all about. So we're going to try to address all of that tonight. So again, my name is Paul Barton, and I work primarily with business professionals who feel like they're going someplace and they don't want public speaking to be the reason that they're held back. Because all of us do public presentations whether we realize it or not. You cannot not communicate. Most of our presentations are impromptu, by the way, if you think about it. And you don't get to carry a teleprompter around to ask somebody out on a date or into a job interview or things like that. So they're pretty much impromptu, and most of them are persuasive when you think about it. So I've been doing business communications for about 20 years, and I'm excited to share with you some tips tonight about how hopefully you can incorporate those into your life. I know got a lot of photographers here, but I know a lot of you have daytime jobs as well. So hopefully you can carry this stuff into the workplace and help you become better communicators. And that's what we're all about. Sound good? All right, so first we're going to lay out kind of a blueprint as to what we mean by being an effective speaker, because it's one thing to say that, but what does that really mean? And then we're going to look at how to have a great introduction to a presentation. Then we're going to talk about some ways to engage people throughout that presentation, but we're not going to go too far into the middle because you're all experts. You know your content. The big two pieces that you need are the beginning and the ending and the structure of how to do that. So we'll end with the ending, and then we're going to just go through some common business interactions, shaking hands, giving out cards, and how to do that more effectively. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. Every time I'm going on a trip or a journey or anything anywhere, I kind of like to know where I'm headed. And this is where I think we're headed. This is not a stock photography for your photographers here. This is just something I shot in my iPhone at a Phoenix Business Journal networking event. And I just was really impressed how this woman, who was probably 5 feet wearing heels, was able to take, these people are all like hanging around talking and stuff, and she was able to just take command of this room. And to me, that's the destination. That's what it's all about. How can you turn those heads, win those hearts, and really get the results that you want? So I asked her when this was over, I said, hey, I got a pretty good shot of you, and I think I'd kind of like to use it in some of my presentations. Is that okay? And she said, you bet. She said, there's a couple other things you might want to know about me, though, if you're going to use this in your presentation. One thing, I used to be terrified of public speaking, and the other is I used to stutter. So she's now my poster child for, you can do this. You don't have to be 6'3" and a commanding presence to take charge of a room. All right, so how do we do that, and how did she do it? Well, we're going to look at our little blueprint here, blueprint to be an effective speaker. And it all starts with what you need to be an effective speaker, and I call them the 3 C's because I can remember things better that way. So if you look at the bottom there, it's credibility. And if you think about it, all communications, no matter what, require credibility, otherwise you're wasting your time and your effort and your money. So I like to use magazine ads as an example, even though magazines are kind of dying out, but because they incorporate so many pieces. So you could hire the best photographers, maybe somebody in this room. You could hire the best copywriters. You could put it on the nicest paper. You could do all those things, but if your product doesn't have any credibility with your audience, you're wasting all your money. Right? So credibility is really key. Second piece is charisma. We feel like you're either born with that or you're not in many cases. It's important to understand whether you're born with it or not, that it is important. But there are things that we can do, so maybe you want to think about it as likability. Right? There are things we can do to make ourselves more likable. So let's just look at those first two for a second. Let's say I come into the room and I have a ton of credibility. I got a PhD in widgets, and I've written 15 books. They're all bestsellers about widgets. And I'm coming here to talk to you about widgets, but I'm kind of arrogant about it. In fact, I'm just a downright, yeah. I won't say the word because you all know what I'm thinking. How effective am I going to be as a speaker? Ton of credibility, no charisma, no likability. All right, well, let's flip that around. Maybe you guys have worked in an office. I worked in 6 major corporations, 5 of them here in town. And there was always like somebody around the office who had a ton of charisma, very likable. He was always the guy that you wanted to sit with at a meeting because he had all the funny stuff to say. I think he ran the office basketball pool during March Madness. That guy, you guys know that guy? Is he at On Semiconductor? Yeah, there's a couple like that. All right, so he's a fun guy to be around, loads of charisma, but let's say there's a crisis situation and you're in a meeting and he's got an idea now. How credible are his ideas? Not very, right? He's just the funny guy. He's the guy that tells the jokes in the parking lot. What's he know about this? So you can start to see we need both things. Right? For our third side, we've got connectivity. And what we mean by that, there's lots of ways we connect with people. I'm going to mention just a couple of them. One of them, we're really hardwired to make connections with people through eye contact. And if you don't make eye contact when you're making a presentation, at some point, you're going to lose people. That's just the way we are. We don't know why we're wired that way. We just are. If we were from another planet down here, we might be, what are these people always staring at me for? But we have to make connections that way. All right, another way we make connections, if you're like sitting next to somebody on an airplane, I don't usually like to talk to people, but if I do, I usually like to take a nap when I'm on the airplane. But if I did want to talk to somebody, you would make a connection if you could find what? Common ground, right? That's how we meet people. And the more rare that common ground is, the quicker and the deeper the connection will be. So that's another way that we make connections. So I met somebody recently that I thought I had nothing in common with, but we found out we both loved this restaurant in Omaha, Nebraska that was a Czechoslovakian restaurant. So, wow, just all of a sudden we're fast buddies because we both like the Bohemian Cafe. All right, so the more rare and unusual the common ground is, the faster and quicker and deeper we make those connections. All right, so think about yourself for a moment. How do you stack up with your credibility, your charisma, and your connectivity with people? And that's kind of an interesting exercise. It's also kind of interesting to think about, you're going to hate me for saying this, but let's think about the 2016 presidential election. And you're all like, why do we have to do that? Here's why. Because it was such a polarizing election. You either loved one candidate and hated the other, most likely. There weren't too many people that were like in the middle, right? You either loved or hated one. The answer to why you loved one and hated the other is probably right there. The person you loved probably had a ton of credibility for you. I can really relate to that person. They probably connected with you. They probably had what you thought was a lot of charisma. The person you hated was just the opposite and all that. No credibility at all. Charisma, are you kidding? Who could like that person? Connectivity, I have nothing in common with that person. So it is somewhat subjective, but it's an interesting exercise to think about any celebrity, whether you like or don't like them. You can probably find answers to why based on that triangle. Some of you might recognize this too. If you've read a sales book or ever been involved in sales training or something, there's a phrase they use a lot called know, like, and trust. And that's kind of the order they say you have to go in. Well, we went in the order of priorities for importance, but if you go backwards and replace those words just a little bit, you'll find yourself at know, like, and trust. So know is really our connectivity, getting to know somebody. Charisma is really like that person, and credibility is really the trust. Same thing, different application. All right, so that's what we need to be an effective speaker. How do we do that? Well, here's the how. There's really 3 V's that encompass everything that we do as an effective speaker. First one is a huge bucket that I'm just calling visual, but that involves body language, facial expression, the clothes you're wearing, eye contact again, your appearance, your grooming, all of that stuff, all is a visual communication. And again, you cannot not communicate, right? If you tried to say, I'm not going to communicate, I'm actually sending out quite a bit of messaging there, right? If I go sit in the corner, and I might not be communicating what I'm trying to communicate. All right, so another way we communicate is through verbal communications, the words we choose. and we can put those together to create interesting things to listen to and also to create a tone. Most of the time, your audience won't really remember exactly what you said, but what they'll remember is how you make them feel. And we can sometimes do that with the words we use. Painting pictures and creating images. The last way is vocally. So vocally is different than verbal. It's not just the words, it's how we say those words. And I've broken those out into what I call the 4 Ps. All right, so pitch, we all know it when we don't hear it. That's called the monotone, when you hear the teacher who talks like this and never changes their pitch. Anybody ever have a teacher like that? You did? Was it a math teacher? Statistics, that's close enough. Yep. So we don't focus on that too much with our coaching clients. If we have that issue, if it's a problem, then we worry about it. For most of it's not a problem, but what we need to take away is we like vocal variety as a listener. So when somebody's giving a presentation, if they're telling a story and they use different voices for the people, so then I said and then they said, we like to hear that little pitch. And we probably grew up with our moms reading us stories and heard what the 3 little bears, how each one was different, right? So we like that variety. Power. I think you can probably guess that if you're loud, you're going to get attention. And that's true. But again, we like vocal variety because sometimes you get more attention being quiet. You want to know the secret? Yeah, you get people leaning forward. So it depends how you use it. And again, we like the variety. I've asked people who've been in the military when I teach at the Art Institute or Australia Mountain Community College, other places that I teach, I ask my students who are right out of the military, did the drill sergeant scream at you? And of course they did. And every one of them will tell me that after 10, 15, 20 minutes, it was just wah, 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 wah. Well, actually it was wah, 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 because it was loud, but it was still just Charlie Brown's teacher talking at him. So being loud all the time doesn't get attention. We want the variety. All right, so pace. We're not talking about pacing back and forth, but we're talking about how slow and how fast we use our words. So I'm a natural fast talker, but I know how to slow down to make a point. So sometimes it's the words, sometimes it's the pace that sets that whole mood and tone. So I can be babbling along, but suddenly come to a stop. And you know that I'm finished in part from my words, but in part from my pace. So sometimes you see an amateur speaker. I saw one recently at an event at the Biltmore in front of thousands of people, and they had written out their speech and gave a pretty good one, but she got to the end and the words were great. It was actually a great ending, but she didn't do a good pace, and no one knew she was finished. And she looked around kind of nervous and then went, "Thank you," and then everyone clapped. So my goal is always to finish my presentation, have my crowd on their feet cheering, that's my goal anyway, without me having to say thank you. They know I'm done, and they know it because of my pace and the words that I used. Right? I saved the best till last. The most powerful thing of anything that we've talked about up here so far, the pause. Turns out saying nothing at all is sometimes the most important thing that you can do, the most powerful thing you can do. A pause can say a lot. It gives people time to think about what you've said. It adds some drama to what it is that you're presenting. A lot of ums and ahs that people say when they make presentations come from people who think that it's not okay to have a pause. And it is. So what their brains are doing is thinking, I'm going to cheat my audience if I don't fill every second with noise. And I can't think that fast, so I'm going to insert ums and ahs. So at least I'm making noise. When in fact, if you could do like a search and replace and search for replace with nothing, you'd not only remove the distraction, you would increase the power by 2 or 3-fold. So don't be afraid to pause, all right? We'll talk about some ways and times to do that. The last piece, the foundation of all of this, the why, it's about the audience. Everything we do is about the audience. The 3 most important things in public speaking are the audience, and the audience. Because think about it, we've all got a million ways to communicate these days. You probably all have smartphones with a lot of apps that you can communicate all kinds of stuff, photos, videos. You can broadcast this event to the world on video right now. So if you're going to present in front of people, It's got to be about those people. Otherwise, stay at home and talk to the wall. If you just want to do all the other things in the triangle and those pillars there, you can do that at home. It's got to be about your audience. It's impossible to say, man, I gave a great speech, but that stupid audience didn't get it. Right? That's like the surgeon saying, I did a great job, but that idiot patient died anyway. Right? So it's always about your audience. All right, we mentioned visual communications. I wanted to dig just a little bit deeper with that because it's really, really important. The interesting thing about visual communication, depending on what study you read, 80 to 90% of what we communicate is done with our bodies, not with our mouths. 80 to 90%. That's pretty wild. But what's even wilder is that your audience gives your body language more credibility than they do your words. So most of our communication is done with our bodies, and it's more credible than our words. I'll give you a demonstration of that. Boy, I'm really glad I'm here tonight. Who thinks I'm happy to be here? Now, I'm using sarcasm, and I'm controlling my body language. But if you think about it for a minute, if you weren't pre-wired, hardwired to know that body language is more credible, supersedes, trumps the words, you'd be really confused. You'd be going, I don't get it. His body says this and his words say that. What's he talking about? But you know that the body language is the credible piece. So you know it's sarcasm and a joke. Now think about how much body language you're sending off when you're not controlling it and what messages you're sending. So it's pretty important to kind of understand it. So I love this photo. It's a historical photo. It's historical because it comes from the very first ever televised presidential debate. So I'm pretty sure you know who these guys are. Who's the guy on the left there? JFK. Who's the guy on the right? Nixon, right? So this is the 1960 presidential election. Again, the first televised event. So I want you to focus in on Nixon for a moment. Look at him for a second, and in one word, shout out what you think his body language says. Tense, uncomfortable. What else? Nervous? Open. Okay. All right. Now just look at his clothing. Same thing in one word. Pretty much the same words, right? And I'd never thought of that until I showed this to, I know a former person from the Art Institute here too. One of my Art Institute students who was in fashion design pointed out that their clothes match their body language to a T. Right? So now let's look over at JFK. Same thing, body language and clothes in one word. What's it say? Confident. Relaxed. Fashionable. All right, so the man in charge. Now think about this. They haven't even stood up and said anything yet. The debate hasn't even started. They're just sitting there. And yet their bodies are screaming out messages.
As a photographer, I want to go and pull Nixon's jacket down and straighten out the
Yeah, you want to fix that. Yeah, the button, which is not actually etiquette either to have the button like that. Yeah, so pretty interesting. When I showed this to my daughters, by the way, their words were awkward on one side and just pretty cool on the other side. So, yeah, he does. And there's a long story behind all that I won't bore all of you with, but yeah, the way he's gripping it, and he's just kind of in not a symmetrical. He actually had injured his knee, and then getting out of the car to this debate, smacked his knee on the car door, hurting it even more. So here's what's fascinating about this. A lot of people still listen to this debate on the radio because not everybody had a TV. I know my parents didn't. I didn't understand why, even when color came along, how it'd say in living color. And I'm like, it's not on mine, but it is at the neighbors. Something's wrong with our set. So not everybody had TV. Some people still listened to it on the radio. So they took the poll, who won the debate. Overwhelmingly, the people who listened to it on the radio said the winner was Nixon. Not entirely surprising. The guy had been a debate champion in college. He'd been vice president for the past 8 years, so he knew all the names of all the bills, the world leaders. He could rattle off the facts. He was in control. He knew all that stuff. But over on TV, they did the same poll, and overwhelmingly the people said JFK won. So what's the difference?
The visual appearance.
The nonverbal communication.
Yep. Non-visual. The visual communication said, I'm cool, I'm in charge.
I got it.
So that's how important this stuff is. So we could talk about body language all night, but there's just a couple things I want you to know. I want to introduce you to this little Jedi mind trick. That's what I call it anyway. And that is, we're all pretty familiar with the concept of that our emotions, the way we feel inside, is going to affect our body language, right? So if I'm feeling sad, I'm probably staring at the floor, and you can tell that from my body language, right? If I'm feeling happy, you could tell that. All right, I'd be doing my vacation dance. All right, but what we sometimes forget, you guys like my vacation dance? Wow. What we often forget is that the opposite is equally as true, and that is that our body language can affect our emotions. What? Yeah, we can fool ourselves. Now, the first time I was exposed to that concept was a long time ago when I worked for an airline, and I went to their call center. It was America West, for you guys who've been around a while. Center, you work for them, okay, at the call center? No. Oh, all right. So I was over in Tempe at the call center, and all the little cubes are like what you would imagine. They're wearing a little headset, kind of like what I'm wearing. But they all had a mirror up on the side, and they were required to look in the mirror and smile before they took the call. Now, why would they do that? Put them in a good mood.
And because you can hear when someone's smiling when you're talking to them on the phone.
You absolutely can, and it's this concept. So by changing their body language, in this case a smile, it caused them to feel differently and project differently. So what's this mean for speakers? It means even if you're not confident, when you come up in front of somebody, you should stand as if you are. It means when you're in a job interview, you should sit up straight. When you're in that waiting room waiting to be called into that job interview, when you're across from that tough client, you should be sitting and position your body as if you were confident, even if you're not, and you'll start to feel more confident. And then a little snowball thing happens. Because I'm standing confident, I'm getting good reactions from the audience, and because I'm getting good reactions from the audience, I'm even more confident. So it kind of starts to snowball a little bit. The other thing I wanted you to understand about body language is these three things that are kind of connected to one another. So let me explain. If I come in the room with a lot of energy, I just naturally am going to gesture wider and talk louder. It's just the way we're wired. Right? We all kind of know that. But what you might not have thought about is if I come in with low energy, that I can manipulate that by changing any one of the other two. They're all interdependent. So by increasing my volume, I will automatically start to gesture wider. Now, I can force myself not to, but it will feel unnatural. If I start to talk louder and I'm trying to gesture small in here, it just doesn't feel right. I can do it, but I'll know I'm fighting it. Or I can start to gesture really wide, and if I'm low energy and talking soft, that's going to feel really unnatural as well. So it's just kind of interesting that you can manipulate those things. If you find yourself low energy, manipulate these things. So where are we headed with this? Big and balanced. That's what we're trying to do. If you want to have that executive commanding presence with an audience that you're standing up in front of, you want to be big and balanced. What do I mean by that? I'll show you. Let's stand up. Anytime you're given a choice of sitting or standing in a presentation, stand. You'll have more energy. You'll look better. People will hear you better. Unless it's obvious that it's totally awkward. I mean, I'm not going to stand up in a job interview with one-on-one. But there are times when you're in a room, you're like, boy, I don't know if I should stand or not. The other people, we're going around the room introducing ourselves. The other people aren't standing. I'm not sure if I should or not. If it's 50-50, go for it. Stand up. When you do, if you were at tables, I would tell you to push your chair in and get behind your chair. Two reasons for that. One is often we have purses and coats hanging off our chairs, and it looks just really sloppy to not push it in. It also creates a little bit of a pause, a good pause. Maybe everybody else is kind of rushing through the introductions. Now all of a sudden, hey, oh, yeah, a professional speaker. This person looks poised, polished, and confident. All right, so how should we stand? The balanced part, you want your feet to be shoulder width or hip width apart, toes pointed the same direction. You don't want to be in some awkward position, because if you start off balance, you have no place to go but an awkward stumble to get back in balance. So take the time. It only takes half a second. Take the time to get yourself in balance. Right? Toes pointed the same direction. Your arms. What do I do with my hands? How many people have that question? Anybody? I hear it a lot. I don't know, public speaking. What do I do with my hands? I don't know what to do with my hands. The answer is you actually do know what to do with your hands, because when you're talking to your friends, you don't think, I'm not sure what to do with my hands. So you actually know, you just need to be relaxed enough to do it. So if you're presenting, you want to start with your hands at your sides, and the secret here is you want to relax your shoulders. Okay, if you lock them up, you're not going to, because your goal is to gesture naturally. All right, so everybody take their hands out like this, up like this. This is kind of the strike zone that you want to be working in. Don't be afraid to get some air under those wings and get out there. You may feel like, man, I'm too far out there. No, you're not. You're fine. All right? So another way you could start your presentation is to very lightly clasp your hand like this and put it at your belly button. This one's trickier because you're going to be really tempted to not lightly clasp it. If you are too firm with it, you're going to stay like this the whole presentation. Again, your goal is to start gesturing naturally. So a lot of us are afraid that we're going to look like that guy out in front of the card thing, you know. And so we go through these motions of trying to, well, I better put my hands behind my back because I don't want to look stupid like that. Or I'm going to put my hands in my pocket, which makes it really hard to gesture. Or I'm going to do this little, a lot of women like to do this little thing where they comfort themselves and kind of like they're holding the flower girl position, I call it. And for the art majors in here, there's the fig leaf.
The fig leaf.
Right? So the problem with all of these is you can't. All right. The problem with all of these is you can't gesture naturally, which is your goal. So naturally means just that. I don't like to teach people to enumerate or any of these rehearsed fake gestures that make you look like a robot or, dare I say, a politician who usually look over-rehearsed in their gestures. So for the most part, we want them natural. I say for the most part because there's a couple things we can learn. First thing we can learn is don't point. If you're a pointer, stop it. Instead, you want an open hand if you need to refer to a specific area. And what's really fascinating with this is you'll find your language changing based on that gesture. If I start talking like this, most likely the words coming out of my mouth are about me and you. You need to start doing this. If I start to gesture like this, saying the same thing, my words are going to change to we all can do better. It's an inclusive gesture. All right? Another one, no fists, seen as aggressive, no matter how you're doing, even if it's from the heart. So no pointing. Pointing even when it's good news is seen as, Miguel, you won the lottery. And you're thinking, great, but get that dang finger out of my face. Right? So it's not about the good news, it's still aggressive. All right? So go ahead and have a seat. When you stand up to talk, another thing to keep in mind is don't start talking until you get into that position. That's another rookie mistake, is to start talking on your way up. And if you're in a big room, people miss the most important part, your name and what you do, because your voice was projecting. They also had trouble seeing you. It's also nice if you can get in a position where nobody's at your back. So you could even position yourself at the front of a networking event at the front so you wouldn't have to walk and look awkward coming into the front. But if you find yourself in the back or the middle, you might want to just kind of step out in the aisle where people can see a little bit better. You don't want to start sitting back down until you've completely finished what you're saying. All right, so completely finish, take a half-second pause, and then sit down. Because the body language should mirror and accompany the words. It should support the words. And if your body language says, hey, I'm done, I'm out of here, and you're trying to have a big conclusion with a bang, now the audience might not consciously think that, but they're going to see something's not right here. He's like done, but he's trying to, all right? So finish completely when you're doing that. All right, so let's move on to great beginnings. Ways to start off a presentation. So I call it the 3 E's. I had to resist with every fiber of calling this the 3 E-migos. For those of you who have seen the movie, but I couldn't resist the temptation of just putting them in. Because when I think Three Stooges and Three Amigos, and that's pretty much it. So the Three Amigos, ways to start off a presentation. If you took a public speaking class or went to Toastmasters, the first two they really like. Excitement. Let's start off with a startling statistic. Let me demonstrate. 25%. I have no idea where I'm going with that. But because I said that with a pause, I got your attention. Something big's going on here. A big promise. Hey, has this ever happened to you? Would you like to learn how to have it never happen again? That will get your attention. Big promise. Would you like to learn how to lose 5 pounds in 5 minutes without even doing anything at all? Right? Then you got to back those up. You get people's attention that way. Provocative question. All right? So those are good ways to generate some excitement. Entertainment. Some people love to start with jokes. If you're a good joke teller, that's a great way to make a connection. Most of us, however, we're not. And reading the canned jokes, they're called groaners for a reason. So if you reach 100% success, you've gotten a groan. So it's debatable whether that's a good idea or not. Some people use various gimmicks, various props, tell an amusing anecdote. Those can all be good ways to get attention. And what they'll tell you in public speaking class is, hey, you've got to grab their attention right away. And there's some truth to that. I would say that's about half truth, because with today's attention spans, if you don't get their attention, you may know your topic really well, but if you don't get their attention, you could lose them before you even get to that part. But I think there's a better thing, and that's the third thing. Better than just grabbing attention with startling statistics and gimmicks and props, I think we really want to make an emotional connection with people. It works better in the adult world. It works better in the business world. It works better than the business meeting. There's still a place for these other two. Even in business meetings, there are times when a startling statistic may be the best way to start that off. All right, but there's this third way I like for a couple of reasons. It's about storytelling, understanding, and finding common ground with people. And one of the main reasons I like it is because I have a little formula I've developed around doing it. In fact, I've already tried it on you. We started off the meeting with it. Now, just because something is a formula does not mean that it's insincere. A formula just gives you some structure to know what the heck you're talking about. And if it's simple and easy to remember, then I can do this formula anywhere, anytime, and start off my meeting pretty well. So I'm going to walk you through the formula that I used on all of you. Magician's about to reveal the tricks. All right, so step one is to pre-engage your audience. I talked to a number of you before this and kind of get to know you a little bit. And it's helpful as a speaker to understand, again, it's all about your audience. I did learn some things. I thought I was going to speak to just photographers. What I learned is that a lot of you have other jobs. So it's not just photography. You have daytime jobs as well. So I learned a bunch of things from that. I learned a little bit more about how you do things. All right? So that's important. Step two, thank the audience. But, you know, a lot of speakers stand up and just say, well, you know, thanks for having me. I am so happy to be here. It's all about I and me. It's not about your audience. So if you notice, I always take time in my head and I say, what do I really want to thank them for? Again, it's not insincere just because it's a formula, but I thought about what did you guys went through something to be here. And hopefully I caught some of you thinking, yeah, that was me. I did have to make child care arrangements, or I did have to slay dragons getting over here, or I did have to brave this weather, and this guy gets it. All right? The next step, an emotional connection, particularly if you have a controversial topic, but even this topic. What were some of the emotions that might be in the room? Anxiety of public speaking, that's an emotion for some folks. Feeling pretty confident but just wanting some tips. Right, so what I like to do is take the two extremes, really confident, really scared, and then one down the middle. Maybe you're just a little bit curious. So then I feel like I've probably hit everybody. Imagine if it was a controversial event. They're building a Walmart right next to my house. I'm at the town hall meeting. If the guy says, I know some of you here are really concerned about what's going on in your neighborhood. All right, so acknowledging the emotion doesn't necessarily mean you agree with it, but it means you acknowledged it. And that's important, that somebody gets what I'm saying. Because sometimes, as the audience, we just like to know that they get it. It'd be nice if they agreed with it, but if they don't even get what we're thinking, that's hard. That's hard. All right, so acknowledge the specific emotions. And the more we can get into the actual emotion, the better the connection will be. Now we finally are going to introduce ourselves, and there's a couple of different ways we do that. I have several different introduction formulas. The one I think I used tonight is not about me at all. It's about you and my prospective clients. So I said, I, Paul Barton of Phoenix Public Speaking, and I work with business professionals who are going places and don't want public speaking to be the reason they're held back. That's not really about me, is it? That's about my audience. There are different introductions I can use. That's one of them. All right? What are my credentials? What are my reasons for being? Sometimes I'll tell people the little story about why I do what I do. Why do I do public speaking coaching? That might connect with some people. I do it because I know it changes people's lives. And I've had people call me back 6-8 months later and say, you've changed my whole life. I got that promotion, I got that job, and it's because I got more confident and knew what the heck to say, and thank you. Right? That means a lot. The next step is just to tell people what's coming up in this meeting. How long is this going to be? Is this person organized? Are they just going to ramble? So give them a little signpost. I told you what we were going to talk about in the order we're going to talk about it. If you're running a business meeting, sometimes a good formula to use is, why are we here? What's the agenda, and how long is it going to take? Because in the corporate world, I used to go to meetings, and sometimes I'd get a good 15, 20 minutes into them before I'd figure out what the heck I was doing there. Like, what did you bring me in here for? Are we taking action? Is this for information only? Is it a mistake? Am I just here for the donuts? All right. So what's the purpose, and how long is it going to be? And then finally, let's begin. So that's my little way of, instead of grabbing your attention, of trying to reach you at an emotional level to make that connection. I agree you need to do all of that within the first few minutes of your presentation, though. All right, so now we're going to move on to the middle. And again, we're not going to cover a ton of this. There are formulas about how to present things. But I'm assuming that all of you are experts in your area. You know the content. What you need is the structure. But here's a couple of tips in the middle to keep your audience engaged along the way. So one of the best ways to engage your audience and keep their attention is to ask questions. Right? So I've broken those down so that you can kind of understand when to use them and when not to. All right, there are 5 types of questions, I think. First one is the open-ended question. That's when I can throw a question out to the audience, and I don't know if anybody has the answer. Right? That can be a great technique, but it can backfire on you. If I ask a really controversial question, I might start a debate in the audience and lose control of my meeting before we even got started. So I need to be careful. I need to think it out. You can't just like throw it out there, winging it without having thought it through. But it can be really good, though. You can crowdsource. I might learn something from somebody had no idea. Who knows the answer? A direct question. That's when our grade school teachers use this to embarrass us. Miguel, they think you're nodding off to sleep, so they call you out. I don't recommend embarrassing adults in the business world, but you might use it if I know somebody has a specific area of expertise. So, Miguel, I know you work in the semiconductor industry. I might ask him a question about that. I'm not sure whether he knows the answer or not, but I know he has expertise in that area. So that's a direct question. The rest of you are still going to listen, though. You're still going to be interested in that. Next type of question was rhetorical. We know that from English class, right? So we ask a question, or we're making a declarative, usually an exclamation sentence, but we put it in question format as a device. Our audiences still like it because they like vocal variety. Why, oh why, oh why, oh why can I get a pastrami sandwich in this town after 10 p.m.? Not looking for an answer to that, I'm just exclaiming. I know you're thinking who would want one after 10, but I would. Self-questioning, should we do this? You bet we should. Can we do this? Yes, we can. I'm asking and answering those questions myself as I go along. Again, it breaks up the vocal variety, and you kind of get to follow along with me. All right, again, I saved the best to last. The most engaging of all the types of questions, I believe, is the show of hands question. And it's engaging for a couple of reasons. We'll demonstrate a little bit. How many people here, serious question, how many people here by show of hands are parents? All right, how many are grandparents? All right, interesting. All right, so here's why this is such an engaging question. First off, you have to physically do something as the audience. Now, I'm not trying to pretend this is calisthenics. You're not going to lose a lot of weight doing this, but you do have to physically get involved. And with today's audiences, if you were busy Facebooking under the table or something, at least you had to, what's going on here? All right. First caveat with this, make sure when you use the show of hand questions that you make it crystal clear whether you're up or whether you're supposed to be down. I don't know if you've had this experience, but sometimes presenters try to kind of wing it, and they end up embellishing the question, and by the time they're done, I'm like, I'm not sure if I'm up or down. I get the topic, but he's now confused me. So make sure it's crystal clear whether you want people up or down. You also need to think of these as a real-time poll. I've given you a poll question, so I need to do two things when I do a poll. One is I need to get the actual results, right? And then I need to report them back. So I looked around, and about most of you are parents. A few of you are grandparents, so I need to report that back to the audience. How many times have you been in a presentation where they asked for show of hands and you started to get your hand up and they moved on to the presentation before you even got up? Does that happen? Yeah, and you feel kind of cheated when that happens, right? Like, why did they ask? I guess they didn't really care. So take the time to get the results, report them back a little bit. So it's engaging between me and you, and questions are engaging, but did you notice another phenomena that happened when I asked about parents and grandparents? What did you guys do? You looked around, right? So now you're engaged a little bit with each other. And the parent question happens to be a pretty interesting one because parents will bond like instantly. Like, oh, I would never have guessed that that person was a parent. Yeah, now we're bonded. We'll probably never talk ever again, but for a second here, we're totally bonded. All right, so there's that engagement that happens as well. All right, so I want to introduce another concept to you. And I'm going to use the table as really just a way of making the point. So if you were running the meeting and really wanted to engage your audience, what do you think would be the best place to sit at this table? The one on the end. That's what most people would say. Right there. Some folks say the middle. Okay. So in what used to be known as a command and control environment, which a lot of us grew up with, the military used to be that way. They're actually changing a little bit too. But in this command and control environment, that's definitely the seat that you grew up thinking that's where you should sit. The problem with that is we don't live in a command and control culture anymore. We live in what I call influence and include. And there's a lot of reasons for that, but it starts, well, I don't know if it starts with, but it's exemplified by cell phones. And I know this from, I teach as an adjunct professor at a couple different schools. Students now have the entire knowledge of the world in their pockets, right? So when I was a kid, if I wanted to know how do I change the tire on my car, who do you suppose I went to ask? Scott, who did I ask?
You ask your father or a mechanic?
Yeah. Who do kids ask now? Google. YouTube. And you think that dad or mom can compete with YouTube? YouTube's going to generate how to change a tire. How many results do you think you'll get? Is that it? Oh, I would think it'd be in the thousands. So now a kid's going to make a choice. Let's see, this one's 2 minutes long. This one's 10 minutes long. This one looks funny. This one has a hot-looking chick. I got to make a decision. I'm going to pick the 2-minute one because I don't have time for 10. 10 minutes is a long time to a kid. Yeah, especially if you're stuck on the side of the road. Right? So there's no way dad can compete with that kind of entertainment. Right? So people come to the workplace and know that. So they don't just automatically say, hey, you're in charge because you're at the head of the table. You must know everything. So we can't command and control them anymore. Instead, we need to influence them and be more inclusive to get them to come along with the program. So command and control can really only influence, and by influence, we're talking about eye contact, body language. I lived in Hawaii for 7 years. We used to call it throwing stink eye. Right? You have a lot of ways you can influence somebody during a meeting. But that person can really only effectively influence those chairs. More effectively in the middle here. They can influence a lot more people. And what does this say to you when you come into a meeting and the person leading it chooses that chair?
You're part of the team.
Yep. Does it show that they're open, receptive to your ideas? Yep. How about the guy at the head of the table? How open is he? We're not really sure, but we might be suspicious he's not as open by choosing that chair, right? All right, so this point isn't really about where to sit, although it could be. It's really more about understanding and using that as an example that we are in an influence and include culture. And that when we make presentations to clients, to fellow workers, co-workers, to the boss, whoever it is, that we need to have the mindset that I need to include you and I need to influence you. I'm not going to be able to command and control you. This doesn't work that way anymore. All right, let's move on to conclusions, leaving them feeling good. Sometimes this is the hardest part of a presentation. And sometimes amateur communicators go along and they had a pretty good opening. They maybe read that you should start with a joke and they actually pulled that part off. They were content experts, so they got through that part. And then all of a sudden they got to the end and they do one of two things. If they didn't plan on having an ending, which I'm not sure why you could get up in front of a group and not, but it happens all the time. And they're like, oh my goodness, I got to stop. So what my students do now is they go, yeah. That's the word that comes out of their mouth. Or one guy I loved, he went, that was the end. Now, a lot of them, though, they suddenly panic and they realize, I hadn't planned on an end. Oh, my God, what do I do? Anybody have any questions? Because that suddenly popped in their mind. Like, I remember seeing a speech once, and they took questions at the end, so I'll do that. And they hadn't planned on taking questions, and they have no idea how to handle a Q&A, but that must be a way. They don't really want any questions. It's just, I want to end this. All right, so we need to plan our endings. First thing we need to plan is the Q&A is not the last thing. It's the second to the last thing. And here's why. You want your presentation, if you're trying to influence a future client, customer, the boss, your work team, you want to leave that team with your persuasive messages going out on a bang, feeling good, feeling a tone that you tried to set. And you probably did that all the way through your presentation. If you do a Q&A, that place has no place to go but down. Because Q&As just aren't that exciting. And if they are, it's usually because something has gone horribly wrong. Like there's some fight erupted and like, man, you should have seen the Q&A in that meeting. Whoa. Right? So if they go good, and here's usually the way the Q&As go, we get some good questions, and then anyone else have a question? Nope. All right, we're done here then. Boy, is that an exciting way to end your presentation. I guess we're done. All right, so you don't want to leave them that way. So we slip the Q&A in second to last, right? And there's a way that we can run that. We're in control of the time. So then I'm going to slip in, all right, no further questions? All right, we slip into my three-step conclusion, which starts with, all right, we covered a lot of stuff here tonight. We talked about this, that, and the other. All right, step 2, call to action. Why did I have you sitting here this whole time if I don't want you to do anything? So I challenge and encourage you, again, inclusive language. I'm not ordering you, but I'm inviting you is my tone. I'm inviting you to take what you learned here today, take it home and figure out how to make it work for you. And if you do, step 3, the outcome, what big, great thing is going to happen? So if I was to do this 3-step conclusion right now with you today, and we have actually a few other things to do, I'd say, all right, we covered a lot of things here today. I would tell you what those things were. So I challenge and encourage you, figure out how to make these your own, practice them, incorporate it into your world. And when you do, you will be a fantastic communicator. You want to end a little up there, and it's okay to get a little bit pie in the sky because I want to send you out in that big note. It's got to be realistic. All right, so that's how I want to end that. So I send people out with a sizzle, not a fizzle. All right? All right, for the very last thing, getting the basics right. We're all small business people. We all know that handshakes and cards can mean the difference between getting to the next level in a client relationship or maybe being sent home. Right? So we want to learn a little bit how to get these right, and chances are you've never learned how to do this. Maybe you think it doesn't matter. But I don't know about you, but I've noticed the world's pretty competitive out there right now, and that these things do matter. I can certainly tell you from somebody who's interviewed lots of people for jobs that a handshake can make or break a relationship. If somebody does it wrong, it's really hard to recover from that. So we're going to learn how to do these right in our last few minutes. So if everybody could stand up and find a partner. Not sure if we have an even number of people, but if not, somebody can come up front and I'll... Everybody got a partner? All right, so the first thing you want to do when you're trying to make an impression, and that's your choice, whether you want to impress somebody or not, is you want to square your shoulders up with them. All right, so not square off, but square up. Because it turns out we have this big arrow on our chest, and wherever that arrow is pointed at is how interested we are in something. So if I'm talking to Miguel and I'm only like this, I'm about halfway interested in him, right? We also don't want to be reaching over tables or chairs like, oh, hey, how you doing? Because you don't really care that much about the person if you're reaching over the table. So pretend whoever you're meeting is somebody that you really admire. If you're going to meet, I don't know who's somebody, Beyonce. I'm not going to reach, hey, how you doing, across the table. I'm going to be like, no, I'm coming over here. Hello, Beyonce, right? I'm going to come see her. So you want to square up with that person. So that's your first step. Step 2, you're going to extend your hand straight up and down. All right? They may not reciprocate, and that's okay because you only control you, not them. All right? So you're going to do that. They may end up being like this. Some people believe the term the upper hand comes from that. It has been my experience that aggressive people will do that. In fact, if you're at the right angle, they may try to turn you. Sometimes I try to turn them back to see what they do. They will almost always try to win that little arm wrestling match.
Put them in an elbow lock?
You could.
I mean, what about the
Right.
guys with the massive handshake?
Yeah, so again, you can only control you, not them, but that does tell you something about
Breaking
them.
my hand.
Yep. Pressure. On a scale of 1 to 10, I say you extend your hand at the right angle and give them a 5. There are some places on the internet that claims that you should match what they're doing. I disagree with that. If they're crushing your hand, you shouldn't be crushing them back. If they're a dead fish, you're not a dead fish. You're a 5 no matter what. Whatever they are is what they are, but it tells you something about them. All right? How long should you shake? 3 pumps and you're out. You don't need to count them. Now, here's the thing. Some people seem to think that as long as they're talking, that they have to continue shaking. I call this that together we're going to inflate this air mattress. All right? So it's okay to continue talking, but 3 pumps and you're out. All right? Let's all practice one here. All right? Yeah. All right, when you've done that, go ahead and have a seat. So you've probably experienced all kinds of different handshakes and varieties of that. I didn't mention, but we should get rid of all the goofy handshakes, too, in a business environment, the kind of Roman clasping around and the thumbs and all the fist bumps and all that stuff. That's great with your friends, but in a business environment,
My favorite is the bro handshake.
the bros.
Like, yeah, man.
Yeah.
What are you doing? Right.
Or they got your elbow and then the other hand comes around for the hug and some awkward things like that and you're not quite sure. I had a CEO of a company try to chest bump me once. It's like, how do you handle that? The CEO of PetSmart is jumping up in the air. Am I supposed to, I don't know. So it's like, I know you're not supposed to beat him in golf, but I'm not sure what to do with the airborne chest bump. So I just kind of awkwardly stood there. No matter what I did, I was going to lose, and that was the point, I think. So, all right, another thing that we do a lot, another common business interaction is the business card exchange, and there are ways of doing that are better than other ways. The normal way that most people in Western culture do it is that we give cards and we take cards. And that system results in the following statistic: 80% of them end up in the trash in less than 24 hours. I'm sure that doesn't surprise anyone. I do too. Let me tell you more about that. When I lived in Hawaii, I saw Japanese people do that. And I thought, what's the story behind that? So I dug a little bit deeper, and I found out that in part it's about respect. It's also about I'm giving a piece of myself to someone else. And as an entrepreneur, that really hit home for me because I'm kind of thinking that too. Because, I was early in my career at the time, and my card might truly mean the difference between paying the mortgage and not, because it could mean the connection that I'm trying to get. So it's pretty important to me giving those cards out. I wanted to make sure I was making that connection. So I really kind of liked that thing. I thought that's a little bit too much to do the whole bow, but I like the concept. So how can I do that more? So first off, I changed the verbiage. I'm not going to give my card anymore. I'm going to present my card. Now, I don't know exactly what that means for you, but I'll tell you what it means for me. Miguel, would you mind being my guinea pig here? So if I'm going to give him my card, I'm just going to stand like this, just kind of flicking them out. I've been to networking events where people go down the line and you see that? Yeah, it's like the blackjack dealer in Vegas. I'm like, why don't you put that in one of those shoes like they have at the blackjack table and just get those out? And they don't even talk to people. I was at one networking event where they said, hey, we're going to do an icebreaker. Whoever gets the most cards in the next 5 minutes is going to win some goofy prize. I don't remember what it was, but my first thought was, aha, here's a contest I'm going to lose. I don't want to win your goofy prize. I want to win business, for Pete's sakes. So my plan is I'm going to talk in a meaningful conversation with 1 or 2 people and let somebody else win the goofy prize. So I don't give cards, I present them. So what I would do, I come over side by side. And I walk them through. So here's me. This is me, I say. Given that Japanese thing, I'm giving a piece of me, but also I'm pointing at my name. All right? Here's my phone number. Don't be alarmed by my Hawaii area code. I'm right here. I've been in Phoenix since 1985. This is my website. If you go out there, you'll find tons of free tips and tricks on my blog site to become a better speaker. There you go. All right, so I can walk them through. So I could design my card to tell a story, depending on what my business was. I'm a photographer. I better have a dang good picture on the back of it to show I'm a real photographer, right? Wholeheartedly disagree? All right.
I was on an interview Tuesday, and I brought a stack, which I have in my pocket right now. And I said, here you go, just go ahead. Pick whichever one you want.
Ah,
I have a lot of different images on the back, and they got to choose their own image
okay.
that they wanted.
That's
And
kind of cool.
She said, wow, I've never had anybody ever do that. That's really cool. And I went, oh, glad it worked out. Because all the other stuff I've been going, oh, I didn't do that right. I didn't do that right either.
So again, you need to personalize it to fit you. I'm curious why you think that's a really bad thing to do, though. I'm not disagreeing with you.
It's just my design aesthetic. I'll do that with my takeaway. I'll let you choose a takeaway, but my
Okay.
business card is a representation of my work, which is usually very clean.
Okay.
Tries to be, at least.
Yeah, well, it should. It should represent you, and they're very individual.
Yes.
One thing I don't get is why there seems to be a rule that they have to be a 9-point type or less. And I don't know who made this rule, but as I've gotten older and need reading glasses, I make mine big enough that I can read them, and I figure if I can read them, then anybody can read them. Right? So mine are like at least 12 point. There's no reason.
Special business card for you.
All right, so I'm going to present it, not give it. What's the person on the other end? If I'm on Miguel's end, he shouldn't be taking it. He should be doing what?
Thanking you.
If I'm presenting, he's doing what? Receiving. In order to receive it, is he just going to take it without looking at it and file it away somewhere? What's he going to do? Going to look at it.
He should ask you a question.
Ask me a question. That way I know he's looked at it. What kind of question should he ask? Really, anything. It just proves he's looked at it, right?
Where's the picture on the
He should
back?
also thank you and then put it away carefully.
Yep, he should put it away carefully in some place with respect. Front pockets are easy for guys to use. Ladies, where are you going to put yours? Pocketbook, right? So someplace with respect. It's arguable whether the wallet is respectful or not. In Japanese culture, your wallet means you're about to go sit on the person, but that's debatable. But the idea is with respect, all right?
German cultures are the same way. They don't want their logo, like car manufacturers, like the BMW logo is never supposed to be on the floor.
Yeah, that would make sense.
We're walking on our logo.
Yeah. So I can't read the 9-point type. I used to ask people quite often a legitimate question about their title. Ooh, I see you do this. What does that mean? Get them to talk about their job a little bit. Now I can't read those, so I can't ask about their title, but quite often I'll just say, hey, I really like your logo. And if it's another entrepreneur that I'm saying that about, that usually sparks a conversation because there's usually a story behind the logo. It'll be like, oh, my daughter designed that. And then there's a whole story there. If it's a big company like On Semiconductor, not so much. Although you might know something about the logos still, like the corporate colors, why they're the way they are, or recent redesign. All right, give Miguel a hand. Thank you for being my guinea pig. All right, so handshakes. So one last thing I want to talk about is how to introduce yourself. And we do this all the time. We do it at meetings where we go around and everybody stand up and introduce themselves. You've been to those type of meetings or networking events. Again, there's different formulas for it. This is a really simple one that you can use in every situation. What I like about it is you can use it in a business setting. You can use it at a backyard barbecue. Wherever you're at, it will add some structure to your presentation, to you introducing yourself. So we usually think of things as being past, present, future. This one just flips that around because it turns out that people don't really care about your past until that big question is answered, which is the present. Who are you and why are you here? That's what we want to know about somebody first. Then maybe we can hear about the past. So if you meet somebody at a networking event and they start saying, yeah, I moved down here from Philadelphia. You know, that's where they have those Philly cheesesteak sandwiches, although I didn't really like those. And you're like, what? Who are you and why are you here? That's what I really want to know. All right. So the other trick to this formula is you should concoct one that has just one sentence for each of those things. You don't have to say your entire life story in your introduction. Because what happens if you say something that someone's interested in? What are they going to do? Let me give you an example. What if I said that I was in the military? If you were interested, as I would be, I would say, what branch? And then when I heard that, where were you deployed? I'd want to know. Let's say, though, that I didn't care two hoops about the military and you just told me you're in the military. I'm going to be really thankful that you only said that and didn't go on. So what's neat about one sentence, if they're interested, they'll ask a question, and that guarantees that you're interesting. If I just start blabbing on, I could get boring. All right, so one sentence is okay because people will follow up with questions. All right, so your present is your relative present. So tonight my present was, my name is Paul Barton. I'm the president of Phoenix Public Speaking, and I'm going to speak to you tonight. My past was relevant to my present. I've been a business communicator for more than 20 years. My immediate future in this case is I'm really excited to share with you some tips and tricks that you can take back with you. All right, let's take that same formula. Now I'm at the backyard barbecue, and I go to a lot of those. My wife is Filipino, and then during the season they have a backyard barbecue with like 200-300 people and a roast pig and all that, like every weekend. So I'm always meeting new people at the backyard barbecue. I carry the same formula with me. What is my relative present at the backyard barbecue? What's the one thing when I'm standing in front of somebody that they're dying to know before they want to hear anything else? Yeah, how do you know the host? Or what's the white guy doing here at the Filipino party? Right? And until I clear that up. Now, there are other white guys at the party that are all married too to Filipinas. Now, usually when we come to the parties, it's a cultural thing. The guys immediately split off over to the guys section. The women immediately split off over to the women's section. So now I'm talking to other white guys at the party. What do you suppose they want to know? What's the number one question they want to know? Who's my wife? So I could start telling them that I moved down here from Iowa in 1985. They don't care. They might later, but the first question they want to know, so I just get that out of the way. Hi, I'm Paul. I'm Maribel's husband. Oh, we were wondering. We knew it was one of those girls over there. All right, and the next thing, they all assumed that I was in the military because that's where all of them were and where they met their wives. I wasn't. I met my wife at Starbucks, so I just get that out of the way too. Yes, at Arizona Mills, and we just went there on Valentine's Day, by the way, because that's where we met, and standing in line at Arizona Mills. All right, so that's my immediate past. What would my future be at an event like that?
I'm looking forward to some barbecue.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward. Man, I heard Bob, this guy that makes this great beef brisket. I've never had it before. I'm really excited to try that. Or I'm really looking forward to meeting some new people. Okay, so you have to make these pretty conversational. But what the future piece does for you is it makes you really a positive person, somebody with a plan, somebody people want to be around.
Doesn't have to be the next 5 years. It can just be like the
Yep.
next hour.
Yep. All right, so you can see how you can use it in different spots. So now when you're at that networking event and they're going around the room, some people are like, oh, I got a little spiel down. It sounds like a commercial. And it even has a rhyme line at the end. Have you seen those guys? They're like insurance salesmen and stuff. Other people are like, I have no idea what to say. There's one guy who always wants to be humble, and he'll stand up and say, not much to say about me. Boy, I know his attempt is to be humble, and I appreciate that. I've had people say that in job interviews. So tell me a little bit about yourself. Well, not much to say about me. Well then, all right, I guess we're done here.
Any questions?
Yeah. So when you find yourself in that position, you're like, what is my relative present? I'm at a networking event. How do I know the host? That's probably what they want to know. Or why am I connected here? Why did I show up here? What's my past that's relevant to any of this? And if it's not just one thing that's interesting about me, I originally grew up in Texas, but I've been here for the last 20 years, whatever that is. And what's my either immediate or longer term future as it's relative? And now you've got a plan. Now you know what to say. All right. So exchanging business cards, we already did that. So that's me. By the way, I love to have this as my final slide instead of the one that says questions, because I'm just tired of that question slide. It's probably because I've been to too many conferences. But the other thing is a lot of people come to events now without pencil and paper. What do you do when you see something you want it to remember? Take a photo. So you can take photos of my card. That's how to get a hold of me if you're interested in any of my services. We do workshops. We do custom in-house workshops for companies. We do personal coaching with a variety of different packages. And when I say we, I'm referring to myself and my colleague, Michelle Trent. Would you stand, Michelle? Michelle's also a coach, has lots of experience in public speaking coaching, and she will work with people getting you ready for a specific presentation or mastering the basics of stuff. So we'll be around afterwards if you want to talk to us anymore. But I'd like to open it up now for real questions. I know we already kind of talked about that. So the way I'm going to open it up is I can say, does anyone have any questions? But I've been trying to practice saying the following phrase because they claim I'll get more questions. If I say, what questions do you have? Because I know you have them, all right? So what questions do you have, Miguel?
So, one thing that I've noticed that you didn't speak about,
Yep.
right, was there's people who do presentations, and they're sitting here, and then they talk to the TV,
Ah,
and they turn it back around and talk to the TV.
yeah.
And I used to start that over. Okay. Hello, my name's Miguel. I've been an addict for 5 years. Anyway. I noticed during your presentation, you almost never looked at your screen.
Almost
right?
never. Okay,
Almost
good.
never looked at your screen.
Glad to hear that.
But I used to do this all the time when I'd be presenting and I'd be going, bam, bam, this is my point, this is my point, this is my point, and then turn and go to the next slide.
Yep.
Right? And I noticed, for me, it's very difficult to, because I do business presentations now all the time.
Ah,
And, it's 15, 20-minute presentation with financials, crawl charts, revenue crawl charts, and all that stuff. And you got to memorize all that. So what tips can you give on kind of not constantly turning back to the data?
yep. All right. Well, first off, and I mean this with all respect, but if you need your slides and you need to keep looking, then you're not prepared enough yet. All right, so you should be able to do it without your slides. Another interesting test is I read somewhere recently that people read left to right, so you should stand to the left or stage right here so that you're looking at me and then the slides. And I thought, well, that's just kind of a little extra little tip. But I was doing a presentation for the Coca-Cola plant, Schweier Coca-Cola over in Tempe, and they have a lot of data on their slides. And I started noticing that I thought that little left to right thing was just kind of a little polished tip. But I was noticing if the people are doing backwards, they're going to the slides first and then that says something about how your whole presentation was set up that you might want to re-examine. So the slides were the star, because that's where the eyes went first. And then they looked over to you to explain them. So the trend, of course, in PowerPoint is fewer words, bigger pictures. You all should like that, being image and visual people. And I think you saw that in my slides for the most part. which usually requires explanation. And again, people like to take pictures of slides, so I tried to design mine like that. I still remember the first time it happened, scared the heck out of me. I was at a conference in Minneapolis with about 200 or 300 people in the room, and I did turn just to see if I had the right slide up, and when I looked back, there were like 300 cameras in the air, and it was like, whoa. And that was the first time I realized people don't take notes anymore. So I started designing my slides like memes so that people could take a picture and that would kind of tell the story, or that required more explanation. Sometimes it matters what kind of a screen you have. So sometimes I have big dramatic pictures, but I'll leave those at home if I'm on a place with a smaller screen. So when I do my site inspection, I'm like, I don't know if I'll even use PowerPoint at all in this group, because I can give all of my presentations with or without it. But boy, when you're in those conferences with those big 15-foot tall screens on both sides of you, those dramatic pictures rock, man, and so I'm going to use them then. Now, you're dealing with a lot of data, and it's hard to get away from that, and it's about your audience and if that's what they're craving. So what you need to do is to tell people the story behind the data to get people to understand, here's why that's important, and make your data relatable. But yeah, it's an upward battle inside of a company that's data driven. Yeah.
Well, no, I started practicing my presentations over and over.
Yep. Now, depending on the setup, I mean, one thing I could do, I didn't need to because I know this slide deck pretty well at this point, but I could look over at my laptop because I can see it without turning around.
That's kind of what I was going to ask is, could you have, I know this is terrible, but I'm such a millennial-driven person nowadays, but your phone, if you didn't have a laptop or something there, or something that you could look at.
Yeah, I
Like
think
we
so.
used it in teaching all the time. You have the lectern and you have your computer right there. You're not looking at the screen behind you. You're looking over your computer. Sorry. You're looking over your computer at your audience, which is your students. Because the minute you turn your head, Miguel, with data in front of students, you turn your head back, they're asleep or they're on their phone. So you lost them.
I've had to memorize all
Yeah. Well, as a speaker, as an actor, as a teacher, in all those cases, one rule applies. You don't want your back to your audience ever. I don't know if any of you have ever taken like theater, like little theater classes or something, but they even teach you like when you're walking across stage, you're looking at the audience, right? And you like turn your shoulders and you do these kind of awkward things because you don't ever want to turn your back to your audience. Not your question, but likewise, if you're writing on a whiteboard or something, a basic rookie teacher's mistake is to be looking at a whiteboard and talking. So the good teachers will do one of two things. The really good teachers can actually write like this. I'm not a good teacher because I'm only an adjunct, so I can't do that. So instead what I'll do is write and not say anything, and then when I'm done writing, turn around and talk about what I just wrote, because I'm not good enough to do that teacher thing. But yeah, it's a tough one. Other questions?
Well, I was just going to say something to your point. I found when I rehearse my presentations, whenever I used to public speak for other things, I ended up saying the word and less because I knew.
Yeah, the more you rehearse it, the less
path forward. So as far as data goes, oh my gosh, print it out, put it in front of you.
Sometimes you can't do that.
Yeah.
No. Like you're presenting in front of the executive vice president for your next year revenue goals and what you're going to do with the business. You better have it all down pat.
Yep.
No notes, no memorization.
Yeah.
You can't look at your computer.
The best you
Boom,
can do is
boom,
to kind of
boom, boom.
understand the story behind the
You
data.
got to put the story together, and that's what I had to do. I had to put the story together,
Yep.
had everything memorized, and literally, I had 15 minutes. And present. It
Yep.
took a month and a half to get ready. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, somebody mentioned lectern earlier. I have kind of a little opinionated about that, too. I don't use lecterns. I see them as pieces of furniture that get between me and my audience. So I'll use them to put my water on and to put my laptop on, but I don't sit behind the lectern and don't read with prepared notes or clinch or any of that stuff. I'd rather walk out and to get my crowd. There are times when you need to do prepared notes behind one, depending on the situation, but ideally I don't like to use them.
I think what I was leaning towards is if you had heavy data that you couldn't possibly memorize that much.
Oh, yeah.
then
Yeah, you
it's
can't.
there, and it's not necessarily you're standing behind it, but you cover your points and then you move on. And the other flip of that coin with students is if you've got one that is falling asleep on you or being disruptive, you physically walk over beside them. You don't take them, call them out or anything. You just stand really close and continue your talk, and that usually stops the behavior. Or again, it's sort of like the pause and the presence,
Yeah.
the physical body language type thing.
But the stories end up being the more exciting part, even among data-driven people. I told you about the Coke workshop. One of the guys there was doing just total data. I mean, it was every slide was the eye chart kind of thing. But then he got to one and he was telling a story about he went into a Walmart and he presented this data to the store manager. And the store manager was so overcome with the data that before the guy even got out of the store, he had them out resetting a display based on the data that he just showed him. I forgot whether it was Powerade or what's one of the ones that they sold, and I guess Pepsi or somebody else was the competitor that sold another one. And the store manager was so taken with the data that he was tearing down one display and putting up another. When that guy told that story, that's all people could talk about. And the next day, did they talk about all the data? No, they talked about the Walmart that tore down the display. So stories are still the more compelling thing.
I mean, one point what somebody made to me is put the data up, they'll read it faster than you can tell it.
Yep. Yeah, they can read faster than you can talk.
Can I add one other
You
tip?
bet.
People are very often afraid of the microphone and turn their head away or hold it way down here.
Yep.
Or as you're finishing a thought or a statement, kind of trail off until it's not audible. And I've seen some really talented people give brilliant presentations that were completely useless because they start out nice and bold and then just trail off. But don't be afraid of the microphone, and usually they are directional microphones, meaning you need to point it right at your mouth, like right at your face. You can't hold it like this. You can't, it's not a bouquet. You really have to point it right at your face.
Yeah, and I would add to that, if you know you're going to speak with a microphone, and you should find that out before you make a presentation, what am I going to have? Am I going to have a cool one like this that allows me to gesture, or am I going to have a handheld? If you know you're going to speak with a handheld microphone, you need to practice with one.
Or
Now-
even one on a post, like if
Yeah.
you have to get up and speak on a stand.
Oh, that's really tough, yeah. Because what happens if you don't practice with it, and then you get there and you do just what you said, that's the people that are banging them into their chest and blowing in them and forget that
talking
they
up
can't
like
gesture
this,
both
like-
hands with it. And
Yeah, they don't adjust it.
so
to-
the classic is the father of the bride who has rehearsed his speech in his bedroom, and he's ready, man. He's got this. He's going to nail it. He's got it written down, and he's practiced it, and then he shows up to the event. First thing that happens is, I'm in a ballroom. It's dark in here. I can't read any of my notes. Now, and I had to hold them. Now, the second thing that happens is somebody hands him a microphone, which he hadn't thought about. So now he's got a microphone in one hand, notes that he can't read in another, and now he's ready to go. Yeah, and those are the people that are like blowing this, bang it against their chest and all that stuff. So if you don't have a microphone, but you know you're going to speak with a microphone, just grab anything, cylinder, a flashlight, anything, and pretend, and get used to the fact that you can't move it, you can't gesture with it in your hand and be heard. Yeah. Other questions or thoughts? You guys have had some great thoughts. I'd be interested if you just have comments or your own tips, presentations that you've made.
I give a few tips to people before they do an interview or take an interview or anything where they might be nervous or need a bit of a boost of self-confidence. And there are a couple of kind of tried and true techniques to give yourself an instant boost of confidence. You touched upon the look in the mirror and smile, which is really powerful. Also, if you stand in the Superman pose. So can you demonstrate just so I don't stand in front of the camera? So, no.
And then there's the victory pose, too.
Yep.
Oh,
So the
yes, this
Superman
one.
pose is like this.
Yes.
And so you do that, and you do that for 2 minutes. And then the other one is the victory pose. So you hold your hands up in a
Yep.
V. 2 solid minutes, don't stop. And do that immediately right before you go into an interview. Even if you go into the men's or ladies' room, whatever you feel is appropriate, and stand in the stall and do the victory pose right before you go into your interview. And every person that I've given that advice to about an interview has gotten the job.
Yep. All right. Well, you guys have been great. Thanks for having me. Again, Michelle and I will be around afterwards. Oh, I'm sorry. One more question?
This
You bet.
isn't necessarily in public, but I'm an Uber driver.
Yeah?
And I sometimes have trouble getting people to talk to me, and that is
Explain
one of my-
overdriver.
It's one of my pet peeves.
Uber driver. Okay, so you were actually driving.
I'm driving a car. I pick
Okay.
up people, and I say hi to them. How you doing? Blah blah blah, and I get one word answers.
Really?
Yeah, sometimes.
Wow. That's
Not always.
I haven't been your passenger then.
No, my biggest compliments in my car is great conversation, all this other stuff, and they, nice pictures and stuff, because I've got a captive audience. I have ads in the back of my seats, like, okay, but every once in a while you get these people that they're dead. They do not talk to you.
Yep.
And that's, to me, it's the most boring drive I've ever had.
Yeah.
I mean, I had a woman go from the airport to Gold Canyon. It's an hour drive. Nothing.
Yeah.
Ask questions that don't have a yes or no answer.
But
Yeah. I mean, you can try to engage them, but some people don't want to be engaged.
yeah,
So.
and then
Definitely not me, because I have found just the opposite. I always talk to my Uber drivers and ask them how they got in the business, and you guys are fascinating people, the careers that you've left. And
you get to meet people on like every 20 minutes. You get to meet a new person.
yep.
They have all walks of life. You get to know what they're doing. They get to know what I'm doing. They ask me, sometimes, why am I an Uber driver? And I go, I can pay bills with it.
Yeah.
And other than that, it's a fascinating job. Other than your car goes to hell real quick. But it is fun. But I try to get people to come in and get their pictures taken.
Oh, cool.
Because I got a captive audience.
Yep.
And I get a lot of yeses and stuff, but the phone call doesn't come through. So.
All right. Wow. A lot of stuff drinking from a fire hose tonight, but thank you. Hopefully you got some stuff out of it. Thank you.